Welcome on behalf of Social Studies School Service. We are delighted that you could join our webinar this afternoon. Today we have with us Mr. Michael Hutchison, which many of you have probably heard before. And if you haven't, Michael is one of our authors. He is a classroom teacher, and he also authors and works for many other companies. Michael, it's always a delight to have you on a webinar with us. Thanks so much for joining us. And Michael, I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you jump right in today.
Okay. Thank you, Pam. First of all, it's great to have an opportunity to spend some time with all of you this afternoon. I'm hoping that you had a good school day today. I don't know how many of you were out of school yesterday for President's Day. We were supposed to be out last Friday and today or yesterday, but because we had some snow days, we had to make those days up. As Pam mentioned, the topic for this afternoon's webinar is inquiry-based learning with Active Classroom. Pam has already mentioned most of this, but I'll just go through everything with you very quickly. This is a session that all of your microphones will be muted, at least until we get to the end of the session. And the reason why we do that is to keep background noise at a minimum. If you have any questions about anything that I'm discussing or talking about, please feel free to type those in the chat window, and Pam and I will be monitoring that as we go along, and we'll try and answer those questions as they come up, or certainly at the end of the session. So I will make time available. And then I also will have my contact information available at the end of the session. If you want to email me, or if you want to do like Donald Trump and tweet me, that would be fine too. So, you know, I have all that information available. Pam has already mentioned a little bit about me, so I'll just pop this up here very quickly. I'm Social Studies Department Chair at Lincoln High School in Vincennes, Indiana. We're located in the southern part of the state. We're about maybe 3 hours east of Louisville, about 4 hours north of Nashville. And right now it's about 78 degrees here. So, you know what they say about Indiana weather, if you don't like it, wait a few minutes and it'll change, because by this time tomorrow it's going to be in the middle 30s. So I'm enjoying some nice weather as I have time. I'm past president of the Indiana Computer Educators, and as Pam mentioned, I am a certified facilitator for Active Classroom and Stratologica as well. So I thought we would start this evening by talking a little bit about what makes inquiry. One thing that Pam did mention at the beginning of the session was if anybody hasn't had a chance to test the chat window, she asked that you would put your name and geographic location. Most of you have already done that, but in case you haven't, that now would be a good time to do that. I know some people popped in after we began already. So let's talk a little bit about what makes inquiry. And most of this comes from a blog post by Dixie Massey on the Social Studies School Service blog. I will give you the web address for that a little bit later. But her blog post was how to introduce inquiry into social studies. So I'm going to just give you a real quick overview of that. First of all, you would anticipate that the students would have a basic knowledge of the topic. They would have somewhat of a background knowledge of it, but maybe not too much. And the reason why is you want to foster curiosity. What you want to do is you want the student to have an interest in what you're discussing, because in an inquiry-based setting, what you're doing is you are not being the person who delivers the information, but instead what you are doing is you're trying to generate curiosity, so they ask the questions. They see, well, this is something more that I want to learn about. How do I go about learning it? What is there about this that I have an interest in finding out more about, whether it's prohibition or causes of World War II, or you know, current events, or whatever it is. So as I mentioned, inquiry allows students to be curious, to use their own innate ideas for trying to find something. And it allows students to pursue questions that they have and topics that they find personally interesting. So a good example of that, and some of you may be familiar with this concept or this idea, anybody in the audience familiar with what's called Genius Hour? Genius Hour was created by Google a few years ago, and what it allows their employees to do is it allows them to work on topics and projects that they find personally interesting for pay, as long as it's something that is Google, that Google could use down the line. And of course, one thing that we hear a lot about and we know a little bit about is that inquiry, if we allow students to do their own thing, so to speak, it allows for differentiating as far as learning. In other words, a student learns at his pace or her pace, or student groups learn at their pace. So it actually makes things a little bit more flexible in that regard. So let's talk a little bit about the curiosity hook. When Dixie did her blog post, one thing I was interested in, because I did some lessons on it myself, was that it was a lesson on prohibition and a particular person by the name of Roy Olmsted. And Roy Olmsted did something illegal. And of course, probably most of you can guess what it is, because we are social studies teachers, but maybe the typical middle school student or typical high school student may not. And what I think of Roy Olmsted goes a lot farther than just the fact that he was a bootlegger. And so I might say, okay, students, what exactly do you think that means? What goes a lot farther than just him doing something illegal as far as alcohol? So hopefully by giving them a little bit of information, but not too much of the story at the start, that's going to pique their interest a little bit and make them a little bit more interested and more willing and involved in the topic. You also want to highlight student questions. Students are going to say, well, what does this mean? Or how did this happen? Or why did this occur? Or whatever. So we want to, identify, and we want to make each student feel as though the questions that they have are worthwhile and questions that are, worth answering. And again, we also want to facilitate research. I suppose the best way to say it, and it's kind of corny, but it's typical, we're the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. In other words, we want the students to say, I want to find the answer to this problem. I'm going to do the research, but I know my teacher is there to help me. He or she can give me examples of things, of where I can look, or maybe help me take my question and maybe somewhat pare it down, make it a little bit more broad or whatever. And of course, the other thing that's really cool about inquiry is that it gives students a voice in their own learning. They guide themselves, so to speak. Another source that I found that I thought I would share with you before we actually got into some active classroom material deals with the 4 steps of inquiry-based learning. And I found this one on the George Lucas Educational Foundation website from back in 2016. And so I'll put all of them up there so you can see those. Students develop questions that they are hungry to answer. We've kind of already discussed some of that. They research the topic using time in class. So for you teachers who are familiar with flipped classroom or blended learning, that's a good example of doing that. Have students present what they have learned. So the presentation would be some kind of culminating artifact, and I will go through some of those with you as we go through some specific examples of projects or activities that are available on Active Classroom that you can use. Then finally, reflection. What worked about the process and what didn't? I suppose another way to explain that to you would be to say, not so much, I mean, what you learned is important, don't get me wrong, but how did you learn? What did you do that was that was different? How did you generate this information? And that's important as we teach those students how to do take those kinds of skills and so forth. So let's move on and talk specifically next about Active Classroom. How does Active Classroom foster inquiry? Well, if you're familiar with Active Classroom, or just vaguely familiar with it, you probably know there are hundreds and hundreds of activities. They encourage student inquiry, and I'll show you some specific examples. If I tried to show you all of them, we'd be here for weeks, so we don't have that much time today, so I will give you some samples, and then I would highly encourage that you go and do some searching in Active Classroom based on, you know, your subject area or based on your grade level to see what else is out there. What I'm going to focus on are some activities specifically for U.S. history, world history, government, and econ. Time constraints keep me from doing much with geography, but if you teach geography, I guarantee you there are a bunch of things there that you can use. These activities can be used as is. I do that frequently, or they can be tailored to meet your classroom needs and abilities. So for example, I teach regular U.S. history, what I call meat and taters U.S. history, and I teach a dual credit college level U.S. history class. If I'm doing an activity from something in U.S. history, say debating the documents, which I'll show you in a few minutes, I will generally have my dual credit kids do much more with that than I would my regular U.S. history kids. Could they do a little bit higher level activity? Yes. And it's just a matter of how I feel about that particular group or that particular class. And finally, activities are designed to challenge students to dig deeper, to find answers, or to develop alternative theories about events. And the examples that I'm going to show you are good, will demonstrate that. So let's look at some individual activities with the time we have remaining, and I'm going to focus again on different subject areas. And again, I apologize for geography, but I'm just afraid in this short of a time frame, I'm not going to have enough time to actually talk about geography. But definitely, if you have any specific questions and would like to reach out to me personally, I'd be more than happy to discuss that with you, email, or you know, Pam definitely will as well. So we're going to look first of all at world history. In Indiana, world history is generally a 10th grade class. In some states it might be taught on a different grade level, but in my school it's 10th grade. So I picked one in particular about the fall of the Soviet Union. That one interested me. Pam will be glad I have my arrows synchronized correctly. But the first thing I would like for you to look at this afternoon is at the top on the menu on the left side, I've pointed to it with an arrow. In the darker blue, in the lighter blue-green, the teal, I guess, there are all kinds of resources that you can use as the teacher. There's a very, very comprehensive teacher guide that basically gives you all of the handouts. If you wanted to do this on pen and paper versus doing it Active Classroom online, you could. What the student sees is down here on the student handout. So they see, like, for example, the handout, which I'll show you bits and pieces of in just a moment, which essentially gives you the choices that Secretary Gorbachev had as far as how to get the Soviet economy back up and running. One thing that I really like about these activities is that they include a very comprehensive vocabulary list. So, you know, for us, I mean, it's just like yesterday, but probably most students that we teach, they have no idea who Mikhail Gorbachev is. They really probably don't know about glasnost or perestroika, although it was common in the news to hear those terms almost every night back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. So the vocabulary kind of gets them settled as far as, well, what exactly do they mean by these terms? Who was Mikhail Gorbachev? And even other terms that maybe, you know, you and I know all too well about bureaucracy, or what barter is, or what inflation is, that maybe we know, but our students don't know. So Active Classroom does a really good job of setting the stage for that. So let's continue on and look a little bit more at this activity. One thing that the students see right away is a timeline. So they get an idea of when in history does this occur. So obviously it says in the subhead, you know, Soviet economy, 1987. I don't know. I mean, I've not done it this way, but perhaps what you might want to do is possibly consider having students do a little inquiry research about, well, what other things were on the mind of the American government or the American president, you know, Ronald Reagan in 1987. What was going on, you know, in the United States, or what was going on in the world? Anything from Iran-Contra to fighting, the Soviets fighting in Afghanistan, an upcoming presidential election, whatever. The other thing I really like about this series is it gives students a good foundation as far as what is going on, what's the problem, what's the issue. So in this instance, it gives a little bit of background, and you'll see it's kind of truncated here, but a good background about what's wrong with the Soviet economy. You know, economic growth is very, very small. State-run factories are very inefficient. They are paid late. So students maybe can kind of compare and contrast what would they do if they were in a job where they were working and they were expecting to get paid, and their boss said, sorry, I don't have the money to pay you this week. Come back next week, or come back next month, or come back next year, and I'll see about paying you then. So the student is then, or student groups, if you decide to go that route, they're presented with various choices about what would you do if you were Mikhail Gorbachev. And as you can tell, there's at least 6 different ones here about everything from tell workers to stop drinking, to fire the managers and replace them with people who are more efficient, end all state-run factories and collective farms, making them privately owned. So students are going to have to decide, what did Gorbachev do? And as a matter of fact, that's the question that's specifically asked in this. What do you think Gorbachev actually did on this problem? Explain. And you'll also notice at the bottom, and this is a little responsibility on our part, the last paragraph says, now that you have been introduced to the problem and explored your options, see your instructor for additional sources in helping you make the decision. Now, what are those sources going to be? That could be anything you wanted it to be. If you're using backward planning PowerPoint about the Soviet Union and the fall of communism, it could be that. If you just said to the students, well, why don't you do a Google search and see what it was like at that point? Or I have some books. I have a video, you know, whatever. But that does require us as teachers to provide a little bit of foundation. What we're doing here is we're giving them the basic framework, but you may have more, which is always a good thing. You know, you can direct the learning to a certain extent with this. So I'm going to move on from world history to one of my personal favorites, and this one is called Debating the Documents. And I use this one quite a bit, especially with my dual credit kids. And this one is a little bit more intensive than the decision-making activities are, as you can tell. This one deals with a kind of a critical analysis of the New Deal. And as you can tell, it just simply says, the New Deal, did it work? So again, if I look at the menu shows me there's, you know, for example, again, a comprehensive teacher guide. If I select that, it downloads the entire Debating the Documents assignment in PDF format, and I can print those out. I can copy them. I usually make one copy for me, just so I don't have to lug a laptop around the room. It just is easier for me. In the white text, you can see there's all kinds of student resources, and I'm going to go through some of those with you in just a minute. But they allow you to, or allow the student to easily navigate from resource to resource, all the way down to a DBQ, a document-based question. So let's take a minute and look at one of the resources. And this one is an editorial cartoon. As you can tell, it's in color. So hopefully that'll pique the students' interest a little bit. And you can see, for example, there are different people that are highlighted here, everybody from somebody who's a crooked politician, big business, honest business, Congress, the worker, or the farmer. You'll also, so that's what the cartoon looks like. Sorry, Pam. Then below it, or to the right of it, I should say, there's a menu choice here. It uses a nifty tool called an ImageXaminer. And I'm going to show you an example of that in just a moment. But the ImageXaminer, one facet of it is like a magnifying glass, and you can actually take your mouse and go around on the cartoon, and whatever the block is that you have highlighted, so to speak, it actually enlarges it. It magnifies it just like a magnifying glass would. Another one does it in quadrants, where it'll take a quarter of that cartoon and it'll blow it up so that the student can see it more easily. And then there's a third choice that just blows up the whole cartoon and makes it larger as well. And you'll notice down here at the bottom the menu ribbon that shows not only this cartoon, but the student can navigate to other graphics that'll be part of this activity. I want to take just a moment here, if I may, to just ask, slow down just for a second. I've got several more sources that I want to share with you today, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions at the end. But if anybody has any questions you want to ask at this point, please feel free to type those in the chat window. Pam and I will monitor that, and we will answer those as we go along. So let's move on ahead and look at some ImageXaminer examples. The first one I'm going to show you is the magnifying view, and you can see right in the middle of the picture there's a small square, and the person who represents the spectator, or speculator, excuse me, he is larger than anybody else on the screen. So you may have some students, if you're using this, say for example with an iPad, or if you're using this with, I've even had students do these with phones. Obviously you don't have a very large screen, so that helps them a little bit as far as making that screen bigger. On this side, this is the quadrant tool, and as you can tell, it takes the bottom right quadrant where it says crooked politician, and it makes it larger. So some things that I can see that I might not have been able to see as easily, in main view. For example, I can see the name of the artist here. I can see that the crooked politician doesn't have as much money or as many poker chips as Big Biz does. I can't see everything about honest politician. He's at the bottom left corner, but I can see he's dealing the cards. So maybe what it's saying here is it's saying, this is a new deal, and the honest politicians are going to provide that new deal, and the crooked politicians are just going to have to live with it. So the students look at these cartoons or look at these visual sources, and from there what they do is they go to analysis questions. So for example, in this one, and we didn't see the Social Security poster, but we did see the New Deal cartoon. So students have to analyze these particular sources. So based on the cartoon alone, what sort of New Deal do you think the figures in the cartoon want? Outline this in a few sentences. Well, I kind of did that a little bit with you. I said that the crooked politician didn't have as much money as big business did, and honest politicians were dealing the cards. So it could be that the New Deal was that the old way of doing things in the past, where the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, that's going to change. The Social Security program, I guess it would depend on when you actually did this activity. Did students study the Social Security Act by this point for you? That would be, your choice about when to use this. So they may already have some background knowledge about the Social Security program, although it does say using just this poster. So in that instance, they may say, well, my grandma or my grandpa's on Social Security, so I know it's income for him. They may say, I have a job, I pay into Social Security, so I know what that's like. So once they're done with the analysis questions, then they compare the documents. And you'll notice here that what they're doing is they have to choose whichever of those two documents they think would more likely be able to help a historian studying the New Deal era. So they have to say, I would choose document 1 or I would choose document 2. So then they have to say, I chose document 1 because I have to give an answer here. I didn't choose document 2, but a historian still might use this document in the following manner. Now notice here what we're doing. This is highly inquiry thinking. What we're doing is we are telling the students, you have to come up with the information. We can, you have the background, but what's your belief? How do you see this? Why is document A more important than document B, or document B more important than document A? And the beauty of debating the documents, first of all, you'll notice the little caveat down at the bottom. Some sources are biased. Biased sources only show you one side of an issue. Biased sources may still help though. But what is really fun about this is to have the students interact with each other in a classroom setting. And that's what the debating and debating the documents is all about. In other words, the students I might say, well, I think document 1 is a much better document than document 2. Another person in class may say, well, I think document 2 is better. So the teacher may say, well, why do you think document 1 is a better document? What's your logic? What's your reasoning? How did you, use your inquiry skills in order to find that? And that's the person who thought document 2 was a good source to do the same. At the end of the lesson, there's a culminating document-based question. And so it gives you a little bit of background here. Your task is to answer a DBQ. And hopefully, if you don't know what a DBQ is, it's a document-based question in which they have to use the documents that they have looked at in order to help them answer that question, as well as maybe their basic knowledge of the topic. So if you have ever taken an AP exam and done the DBQ on an AP exam, it's very, very similar to that. I usually give my students more than 40 minutes to complete it. So using all the sets of documents, answer this question. Okay, this is the DBQ. The Great Depression lasted a decade, while New Deal program after program failed to do anything to end it. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Why? So now the students posed with a question that they have to use their inquiry skills to answer. Okay, I've seen the evidence. Do I agree or do I disagree with this statement? So I always tell my students that it doesn't make any difference to me how they answer it. If they agree with the statement, that's fine. If they disagree with the statement, that's fine. But what I want to see is I want to see their logic and reasoning, and I want to see that they have used the resources, the documents, in order to answer the question, because that's why the documents are there. That's why they do the research. That's why they answer the question. If they use only their own opinion, and there's nothing wrong with their opinion, but if they use only their own opinion, that's not worthwhile here, because they have to use the information they have. Notice also that at the very end of this clip that there is a checklist that the student can use that helps them write a DBQ essay. So on the next slide, I will show you that DBQ. Okay, so here's the checklist. And again, because of the size of the slide, I wasn't able to put it all there, but like, for example, the introductory paragraph, it says, does the paragraph clarify the DBQ itself? Does it present a clear thesis or overall answer to that DBQ? So what I tell the students that they should do is they should restate the DBQ. They can do that in their own words and just say yes or no, and say, I'm going to, using evidence, I'm going to show you how it does. I'm going to show you, that my viewpoint is correct. And of course, they're talked about internal paragraphs. What are these? How are these paragraphs organized? Are they logical? And of course, at the end, we want to see use of the primary source documents. For me, if this is a personal confession, this is probably the biggest issue I have with students doing these. They have no problem telling me what their viewpoint is, but they don't know, well, how to actually use the evidence. And that is a skill, and I hope you would agree with me, that is a skill that they are going to have to know and use, not only for my class, but for every other class probably, or most other classes that they're going to be taking, not only on the high school level, but on the university level as well. So again, we're focusing here on the inquiry. How do, what did we learn? What did we research? How did we research it? So let's move on from debating the documents to government activators. Again, this is another resource that I use a lot in government class, obviously. And again, just like the other resources that I've shown you this afternoon, there's a comprehensive teacher's guide. If I want or need to, I can print all of this out and have it all in paper format if I want to do it that way with the students, or if I want to just have a copy for my own perusal, my own personal use. And notice also that the menu allows not only that I can go through in a logical manner and see the different elements to this activity, but I can also, the students can do it also. This particular activity is called Bill of Rights, Procedural Rights. There are, gosh, I don't know, I'd say maybe 15 different activators, and they are all outstanding. So there's one, for example, on the different branches of government. You have one on the executive branch, on the legislative branch, the judicial branch. There's one on politics and elections. There's one on personal rights. There's one on the bureaucracy. There's one on federalism. So you could almost teach a government class just out of government activators alone. In addition, for you people who are middle school teachers, there's also a set of government activators that are available for the middle school level. Since I teach high school, I don't use those very frequently, but I will say that I use the high school activators for my regular government classes, as well as for my AP government classes as well. Again, just like with the other ones, here's a little bit more of a blow up of the menu ribbon, so you get an idea of what all the choices are. There is a graphic organizer that goes with government activators, and every unit includes a historical background essay. You may have seen it a couple of slides ago. So students can use that, and as I said, that almost gives you enough information that you could almost teach a government class specifically with those alone. Some of these are kind of just text or fact-based questions. For example, what are the provisions of the Fifth Amendment? So we know that's things like protection from double jeopardy, self-incrimination, eminent domain, different things like that. We know the Sixth Amendment is right of counsel. They can find those in the background essay, and they can answer those questions based on that. The inquiry part of this really comes more with a case study activity. And you might remember when I showed you the menu ribbon a couple of slides ago that there were about 7 or 8 different case studies. They are all Supreme Court cases. I picked this one because, first of all, it's an interesting case to me. And of course, we deal a lot with juveniles, and so it's a good case about juvenile rights. This is a court case called In Re Galt, and you can see a little bit about what happened in this case, who Gerald Galt was, why was he in trouble with the law, and what specifically was the issue in this case. And then below, there are some really good inquiry-based questions here. So Galt's contention was his due process rights were violated as a juvenile. So students would get in groups, and what they would do is they would say, well, based on the evidence, were his due process rights violated? So they would have to answer yes they were or no they weren't. I would probably want my students to go a little bit more in detail here, and that would be, okay, why do you think his due process rights were violated? That means they have to do a little bit of research. I'll get to that in the next slide. Notice also they have to look at the Supreme Court decision. How did the Supreme Court rule on this case? Now, I could kind of put some of you on the hot seat here and ask for volunteers to tell me how did the Supreme Court rule. But since we're kind of on a short time frame here, I won't do that today. But you probably know that the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Galt. So let's go a little bit farther in this. And what the students have to do now is they have to look at the specific case. So they have to do that. The teacher can provide information on that case, whether it's textbook or an internet resource, or just say to the students, just say, hey, you guys look this case up, find it on Google, go to Find Law or Justica or whatever, and you guys, find the answer. So, we're looking at what are the facts in the case, the actions that led the situation coming before the court. What was the position of the petitioner? What was the position of the arguments of the respondent? Of course, the petitioner is Galt. The respondent is the legal authorities, constitutional issues. But the best thing about this, if you look at the very last paragraph, develop a short case study presentation. So parts can be dramatizations to explain the facts of the case. Somebody could be Galt, somebody could be the arresting officer, somebody could be the person who complained about him making obscene phone calls, whatever it is. So they can do that in front of the entire class. And the key here is the word imaginative. The students decide what they're going to do. So let's move from government and end up with economics. I will just tell you right off the bat, I am not an econ teacher. I have taken econ classes, but I am not licensed in econ. But this was one particular case that I really liked, one particular activity, because look what it deals with. It deals with the Affordable Care Act. And when was the last time you were watching television, watching the news, and they didn't say something at some point in time about Obamacare? And that's exactly what we're talking about here. What the students have to do is they have to look at different arguments for or against the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare. As with all the other resources that I've mentioned in our session today, this one again has a comprehensive teacher guide. It has student activities. As I mentioned, I can take all of these, and what I can do with them is I can print them, or else I can just assign them in Active Classroom, and the students can do them digitally, which I'm sure a lot of you do anyway. So the teacher's guide is there. There's an introduction to this activity and also student activities. So let's take a peek inside and see exactly what we're doing here. So I took a screenshot of a page from the teacher guide just to give you an idea of what it looks like. So it gives you an introduction and major arguments against it, major arguments for it. And what the students are going to do here is they're going to look at these excerpts and they are going to wind up writing an essay. Now, to me, an essay can be just as much an inquiry-based activity as a simulation or a government activator could be, or anything else. So in this one, again, I can't show you every single argument that's in the teacher guide. If you're interested in this one, I would definitely suggest highly you do a search and find it, and you may find it to be appropriate not only for econ classes, but when I originally saw this one, I thought, this one would work really well, not only for econ, but it would work for government. It would work for sociology. It might work for a current affairs class. So you're not constrained just because it says econ. You're not constrained to just econ with this. So let's take a minute and look at a student activity. Again, I took this from the teacher guide and not the online version. And as you can tell with this one, what students do, there's like 9 different arguments here. So they have to say, okay, which one of these arguments support the ACA? Which ones are opposed to the ACA? So what we're trying to do here, I would imagine I would be shocked if students don't have some opinion about the ACA. Now, the only problem is, and not to get into a political discussion this afternoon because we don't have the time, but, they may say, I don't know what the ACA is. I know what Obamacare is, but I don't know what the ACA is. So, and a lot of adults are the same way. They don't know that the ACA and Obamacare are exactly the same thing. So this way, it gives students an opportunity to look at arguments, those in favor and those opposed. And then at the end of it, what we do is we ask students to write an essay of no fewer than 200 words explaining why they support, oppose, or are ambivalent about the ACA. And they need to cover at least 2 of those topics that are located below the box. Now, what I normally do here is I normally don't have students do essays online in Active Classroom. And the reason why I don't is because I like to mark them up. And formatting is at a premium in Active Classroom. So I always like to have my students double space. They can't double space this way. But you may find it different and you may want to do it that way. But the other thing I like is at the very bottom of the screen. Come to class prepared to present your opinion and to defend or change it. In other words, what we're doing is we're asking students to show that their research is predominantly correct and they are right. Or they may find that someone gives a viewpoint that they hadn't considered, but they find that, hey, this viewpoint is very valid and maybe I should. One thing that I hadn't considered with this is I could have my students do their work as a Word document, and then they could attach it, upload it to Active Classroom. That might be something I might want to consider doing. Every rose has a thorn. No, my students would have to have Word, or they'd have to have the ability to type, and sometimes they just may not. So that's but again, but that's the beauty of AC. There's a number of different things that you can do here. So let's wrap up. First of all, if you don't have questions you want to ask me, I have a few questions that I want to ask you. The first one is, and we do have, I guess, a couple of minutes. Pam will probably want to have us wrap up here soon. How might you effectively integrate inquiry-based learning with your students or subject area? Anybody want to try that one in just a few words? While you're pondering that one, what advantages or challenges do you see regarding utilizing inquiry-based learning? If you feel the way I do about some of this, I sometimes have students who don't like the idea of having to think much beyond, oh, the teacher told me that the answer to this one is A, and so I have to remember A. I don't want to have to dig for anything. I don't want to have to learn. I would just rather have you tell me. How might you develop your own inquiry-based activities or adapt Active Classroom activities or materials? Again, I mentioned that right up. There's things that that you can adapt, you can change. I have my my students work, or my dual credit students do more with debating the documents that I might with my meat and taters you as history kids. Okay, and then finally, any questions about the session that you would like to ask me? And that just leads to the final slide. And that is, thanks for participating in today's session. And this is my contact information. Pam made a really good point. She says, I love using History's Mysteries. Pam, I haven't used those as much probably as you have, but as I mentioned when we first started, it's like a kid in a candy store. There's so much stuff in Active Classroom. It's awfully difficult to use everything that's there. So Pam says History's Mysteries are all ready to go. They're already made and ready to go, and they create a great inquiry environment. I included the web address for the Social Studies School Service blog pages. At some point, I will have a blog post with some of the resources and so forth that we talked about today. And certainly you're welcome to look at that. Christy asked, are there activities for 7th grade social studies? The answer to that is absolutely yes. Pam may want to go a little bit more into detail on that, but I can tell you, for example, the government activators, there is a middle school and a high school level. I could easily see using debating the documents in a middle school classroom. Pam just asked you, what do you teach? But I could see those easily being adapted, just like some of you may deal with different clientele as far as ability level. So I deal with a lot of kids that are upper level. They're AP level. So I adapt in that regard. You might adapt a little bit, lower if you feel the need to do that. That's incidental to, whatever your situation is. And certainly, okay, Pam Christie says she teaches Southwest and Southeast Asia, Africa, government, econ, religious groups, environmental issues. She has the whole 9 yards. I would say there are a lot of good econ activities that are like comparative for that area. The What I Eat stuff is really good. The big eras stuff. I don't teach world history, so I can't really, speak to that. Pam probably can more than I can. And Hungry Planet is good too. I just had another question come in, Pam, and I've got to scroll back. Monica asked, what are good places for me or students to find research on world history? Monica, again, I'll let Pam kind of chime in on this one, but there are hundreds of activities. The debating the documents activities, there's a whole set of them for world history too. There are decision-making activities in world history. It's the one that I showed you to start the session. There are history unfolding, if you like the ImageXaminer that I showed. That sort of thing. There are, all kinds of history unfolding activities. Most of them are fairly short. You can do those in probably a class period or less. So again, it's just a matter of what I would do is, think about whatever lesson, whatever unit you are teaching right now. So let's say you're teaching the Reformation. I would just do an active classroom search, and I'm thinking probably everybody in here knows how to do the advanced search, where you can specify a subject area, and then you can specify a topic. And okay, so Pam has just replied back. She said, for middle school in Georgia, we have created some specific new resources. Regional government and economics, they focus specifically on countries around the world and their forms of government. Check those out, even though you are in Texas. Pam, would they just be able, is there anything that's in like the advanced search where it says like regional government Georgia or anything, or would they just kind of have to pick and choose from that? Brandy's asking now, or how do you go about designing inquiry-based experiences while also preparing students for standardized tests? She mentions AP exam, etc. Also, do you find that the model helps you accelerate and or dig deeper? Definitely it helps dig deeper. I'm kind of in a unique situation with my upper level kids. We have a agreement with the local junior college where the kids don't take any AP exam. Even though I teach AP government, they don't take the AP exam to get college credit. The college credit is administered through the junior college here in town, and so students pay a reduced fee in order to get the credit, and then and for AP government, all they have to do is sign up for the class. As long as they have a C or better average, that's all they need. So I don't really have a whole lot of experience about preparing students for standardized exam. Also in Indiana, I don't know if this is going to make everybody from Texas, California, and Georgia want to pack their bags. We don't have standardized testing on the high school level for social studies. So I don't worry about that because it's not a criteria for graduation or anything like that as far as they have to pass a standardized test. It's been brought up several times, and mainly it's the reason why we don't do it. It's a budgetary issue by our State Department of Education. They don't want to spend the money to build the test. So we did have end of course assessments that were in the planning stage, and they never came to fruition. Hope that answers your question.
Michael, it certainly seems to be a lot of interest in the inquiry-based learning, and I know you're planning on getting those. I don't know if you've submitted your blog already, but that blog.socialstudies.com is where you're going to find Michael's work on inquiry-based learning. And as he mentioned earlier in his session, he drew some of his work today from an article on the blog by, and help me if this is wrong, Dixie Massey. Is that right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called Inquiry-Based Learning in Social Studies, I think. Yeah,
so check out Dixie's blog, and then Michael's blog will be up soon. Check that out. He'll go into a little bit more detail there about the inquiry-based learning.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, thank you for your presentation today. I always appreciate you coming on and joining us. Thank you, audience, for being with us. We appreciate very much your attendance. We'll be sharing with you tomorrow via email where you can find this post, and hope that you can watch it again or share it with your colleagues. And we appreciate again so much you taking time out of your busy day to be with us this afternoon. Have a great afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Pam.